The most expensive therapy room in the city had seen them all come and go. The specialists, the consultants, the men and women with framed degrees and quiet voices and careful hands. They arrived with clipboards and left with apologies. In the chair by the window, 7-year-old Ethan Bennett had not spoken a single word in 3 months. His mother, Olivia Bennett, had spent more money trying to fix that silence than most families earned in a year. None of it worked, until the electrician sat down on the floor and did something none of those experts had ever thought to try. Olivia Bennett was not the kind of woman who failed. She had built MedAccess Technologies from a 12-person startup into a publicly traded company with over 4,000 employees across 9 cities. She had navigated hostile board votes, survived a federal regulatory audit, and closed a $200 million acquisition deal on 4 hours of sleep. She was methodical, decisive, and completely intolerant of problems that could not be solved. Ethan was her only child. He was 7 years old and had, until 5 months ago, been the loudest presence in any room he entered. He had opinions about dinosaurs. He argued about bedtimes. He narrated entire episodes of his favorite cartoons from memory while pacing back and forth across the kitchen floor. He was, in every sense, a perfectly ordinary, wonderfully noisy little boy. Then came the accident on Route 9. Olivia had not been in the car. She replayed that fact in her mind constantly, both as relief and as guilt. Ethan had been with his father, Daniel, driving back from a weekend camping trip. A truck ran a red light. Daniel died on impact. Ethan walked away without a scratch, and within 72 hours, he stopped speaking entirely. The doctors called it selective mutism, triggered by acute traumatic stress. They explained it carefully, using words like dissociative response and emotional lockdown and neurological withdrawal. Olivia had listened to all of it. She had taken notes. She had gone home and researched every paper published on childhood trauma and language loss in the past 15 years. Then she did what she always did. She assembled the best team money could find and told them to fix it. The penthouse had a spare bedroom that Olivia converted into a dedicated therapy space within 3 weeks of the diagnosis. She had hired Dr. Sandra Price, a speech-language pathologist with a 3-month waiting list and a reputation that reached across the country. She had brought in a child psychologist named Dr. Aaron Tully, who specialized in grief and early childhood trauma. She had added a behavioral specialist, a play therapist, and a consultant who worked exclusively with nonverbal children recovering from loss. The room had soft lighting. It had a weighted blanket. It had every kind of sensory toy and therapeutic tool available on the market. Ethan sat in the chair by the window and looked out at the skyline and did not speak. Matthew Carter woke at 5:15 every morning without an alarm. He had learned to do this because his daughter, Emma, had a habit of appearing at his bedside at 5:30 with a stuffed rabbit and a detailed series of requests. Getting up first gave him 15 minutes to make coffee, organize the day, and remember who he was before the morning began. He was 34 years old. He had worked in electrical maintenance for 11 years, first for a commercial contractor and then, after Emma's mother left, on his own licensed, bonded, taking whatever contracts came through. It was steady work. It paid the bills. It gave him the flexibility to drop Emma at school in the morning and pick her up in the afternoon and be present for all the irregular hours that single parenting required. He was not a man who talked a great deal about his life. He fixed things. He showed up when called. He did the work quietly and well and went home. Emma was 6. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, and an absolute certainty about the emotional state of every living thing around her. She could tell when Matthew was tired before he admitted it to himself. She had once informed a neighbor that the neighbor's dog was sad, and the neighbor had checked, and the dog had had an infected tooth. Emma accepted this kind of information as entirely ordinary. The two of them lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city, 20 minutes from the airport, and 40 minutes from the penthouse building, where Olivia Bennett was paying a team of specialists to help her son find his voice again. The electrical system in the penthouse had been upgraded improperly 3 years prior by a contractor who cut corners on the junction panel in the dedicated therapy wing. No one had noticed until the lights in that particular room began flickering during sessions, which the therapists found disruptive and Olivia found unacceptable. The building manager put in a service request. Matthew's name came up in the rotation. He arrived on a Tuesday morning with his bag of tools, a work order, and no particular awareness that he was about to walk into anything other than a standard commercial repair. He found the room without difficulty. He knocked, entered, and stopped. Ethan was sitting in the chair by the window. He was wearing a gray sweatshirt and holding a small wooden block in both hands, turning it slowly. He did not look up. A woman who was clearly not Ethan's mother, Dr. Price, though Matthew did not know her name, was seated across from him, speaking in a low, measured tone about something involving feelings and safety. Ethan gave no indication that he heard any of it. Matthew stood in the doorway long enough to take in the room. Then he nodded at the therapist, crossed to the panel on the wall, opened it, and began to work. He said nothing. He did not introduce himself to the boy. He did not ask anyone to move. He simply worked. Ethan did not look up for 4 minutes. Then, very slowly, without turning his head, he slid his gaze sideways toward the man crouching near the wall. It lasted only a second. Then he looked back at the wooden block in his hands. But Matthew had seen it. He said nothing. He finished his preliminary assessment, noted the scope of the repairs, packed up his tools, and left. Dr. Price resumed her session. Olivia, watching through the small monitor mounted in the adjacent room, rewound the footage twice to confirm what she had seen. Her son had looked, just for a second, but he had looked. She had been so hungry for that second that she had to stand very still for a moment, to keep herself from making it mean too much. To understand why Ethan's silence was so complete, it helped to understand what he had been before it. He had never been a quiet child. He processed the world primarily through language, narrating, questioning, describing, announcing. His father, Daniel, had been the same way. The two of them had filled whatever space they occupied with a constant stream of words, and Olivia, who communicated in a more economical mode, had always found it both exhausting and deeply comforting. When the accident erased Daniel's voice from the world, it seemed to take Ethan's with it. The therapists had tried a comprehensive range of approaches. The speech pathologist used a graduated exposure method, beginning with nonverbal communication, pointing, gesturing, drawing, and attempting to build slowly toward sound. Ethan cooperated with the nonverbal elements and then simply declined to move beyond them. Dr. Tully, the child psychologist, used narrative play therapy, offering Ethan figurines and prompting him to construct stories through action. Ethan arranged the figures carefully, assigned them clear spatial relationships, and then looked at Dr. Tully and waited. The behavioral specialist introduced a reward system. Each attempted vocalization, even a breath shaped like a word, would earn a token. Tokens accumulated into prizes. Ethan had studied the chart, selected a prize he clearly wanted, and then made no attempt whatsoever to earn it. The play therapist had tried puppets. The consultant had tried sand trays. Someone had suggested music therapy, and Olivia had hired a music therapist who drove 40 minutes each way twice a week and spent 6 sessions trying to coax Ethan into humming along to something, anything, a single note. Ethan had listened to the music with great attention and perfect silence. What none of them had recognized, at least not in time to use it, was the specific nature of what Ethan needed. They were all operating under the same structural assumption that the goal was to draw him out, to create safe enough conditions, compelling enough incentives, warm enough relationships that he would eventually choose to cross the threshold back into language. They were waiting at the door, holding it open, gesturing encouragingly, and Ethan was sitting on the other side of that door and showing no interest in walking through it. Nobody had thought to go in. Matthew came back the next morning to complete the repair. He had estimated it would take approximately 2.5 hours. He had filed the paperwork, blocked the time, and arranged for Emma to go to her after-school program. Ethan was in the room again. this time without a therapist. A woman Matthew recognized as the boy's mother. He had seen her briefly the day before, standing in the hallway with a tablet in her hands, sat in a chair near the door, reading something on a screen. She glanced up when Matthew entered, assessed him in the precise, efficient way of someone accustomed to evaluating people quickly, and returned to her screen without speaking. Matthew opened the panel and began his work. He worked quietly for about 20 minutes. Then he paused, reached into his bag, and pulled out a small notepad and a pencil. He sat down on the floor, not in a chair, directly on the floor, cross-legged, and began to sketch. Not the actual wiring diagram he was using for the repair. Something simpler. A basic circuit, the kind a child might encounter in a school science kit. A battery, a wire, a light bulb. He drew it carefully. Then he drew it wrong. He connected the wire to the negative terminal in a way that would have left the circuit open, the bulb unlit. He kept drawing, as though he had not noticed the error. He added a switch. He added a second bulb. Both were connected to the same broken circuit. Olivia watched from the doorway. She had no idea what he was doing. Ethan, from the chair by the window, watched too. Matthew continued adding to the diagram. He drew a house around the circuit, small and square with a triangular roof. He put a figure in the window. He added a garden. He drew the garden in some detail: flowers, a fence, a tree with apples. None of the lights in the house worked because the circuit was still broken, and he had not fixed it. He turned the page slightly, as if reconsidering, and began drawing a second version of the circuit next to the first. This one had the wire connected correctly, but he stopped halfway through, pretended to get confused, and crossed it out. 8 minutes passed. Then Ethan got up from the chair. He crossed the room in 6 small steps, crouched down beside Matthew, and without a word, took the pencil out of Matthew's hand. He found the break in the original circuit. He drew a single line, clean, precise, direct, connecting the wire to the correct terminal. He put the pencil down and looked at what he had done. The circuit was complete. The bulbs in the diagram would have lit. Ethan went back to his chair. Matthew looked at the corrected drawing for a moment. He nodded, as though this were a perfectly ordinary thing that happened every day, and went back to work on the panel. Olivia, in the doorway, had stopped breathing. She had it on the room's monitoring system. She played it back 3 times that evening, pausing on the moment Ethan's hand moved to take the pencil. Each time, she felt something shift in her chest, not hope exactly because she was too careful with herself for hope, but something in its direction. She found Matthew in the building's service lobby the next morning before he left. "What were you doing yesterday?" she asked. Matthew zipped his bag. "Finishing the panel. In the room. With the diagram." He looked at her steadily. He was not a man who became flustered in the presence of authority. He had spent 11 years dealing with building managers and property owners who expected deference and got competence instead. The boy was watching. "I gave him something to look at." "You gave him something wrong to look at." "Right," Matthew said. "Things that are broken are more interesting than things that work." Olivia stared at him. "Every specialist I've hired has been trying to get him to talk. You just let him correct your drawing." "He didn't want to be pulled anywhere," Matthew said. "He wanted a reason to move on his own." "You're not a therapist." "No," he agreed. "I'm not." There was a long pause. Olivia was accustomed to having the longer pause, the last word, the decisive summary. Matthew simply stood there without apparent discomfort, waiting. "I have a full team of professionals in that room 3 days a week," she said finally. "None of them have gotten a single voluntary movement out of him in 6 weeks." "I know," Matthew said. "So what are you suggesting?" He didn't answer immediately. He seemed to be choosing his words with the same care he used for measuring wire. "I'm not suggesting anything. I was just fixing the panel. But if I happened to be in the room again tomorrow, I'd probably bring another diagram." Olivia had not survived 12 years of corporate negotiation by being easily maneuvered. She also had not gotten this far by dismissing data when it showed up in inconvenient forms. She told him he could come back. She set 2 conditions. He would work within the room's existing schedule and not interfere with the therapist's sessions. And he would not, under any circumstances, pressure Ethan to speak. Matthew agreed to both without hesitation. Over the following 9 days, a routine formed. Matthew arrived at 9 in the morning, after the first therapy session had ended, and before the second was scheduled to begin. He brought tools and, increasingly, other materials. A small box of electronic components, a circuit board kit from a hobby shop, a set of illustrated technical cards he had laminated at a copy center the night before. He never spoke to Ethan directly during this period. He did not say good morning. He did not ask how Ethan was feeling. He sat on the floor, set up whatever he had brought, and began working on something that contained a deliberate error. A circuit with a missing component. A mechanical drawing with a gear tooth in the wrong direction. A diagram of a simple lock mechanism where the tumblers were assembled out of sequence. Ethan watched, always from the chair, always from a careful distance. On the third day, he moved the chair 6 inches closer. On the fourth day, Matthew brought a circuit board kit and began assembling it incorrectly, switching the positions of 2 resistors whose values were clearly labeled. He worked on it for 11 minutes. Ethan got up, walked over, pointed at the 2 misplaced components, and sat back down. Matthew switched them. The small LED on the board lit green. He showed Ethan the lit board without comment. Ethan looked at it for a moment, then went back to the window. On the 6th day, Matthew brought a second notepad and set it within reach of the chair, along with a cup of colored pencils. He made no reference to them. By the end of the session, one of the pencils, a blue one, had been moved from the cup and placed on the notepad. On the 7th day, there was a drawing on the notepad. A circuit, correct, more complex than anything Matthew had shown him. Matthew studied it for a long time. He added a small mark of his own, a question, in the form of a missing component, and left the notepad where it was. On the 8th day, the missing component had been drawn in. Below it, in small, careful block letters, were 4 words. Don't fix it. Let me. Olivia found the notepad that evening. She read it 3 times, standing in the middle of the empty room. Then she sat down in Ethan's chair by the window and cried, quietly and alone, for the first time since Daniel's funeral. She did not allow herself to do this at the funeral. She had been too busy managing logistics, receiving condolences, making sure Ethan had water and food, and a familiar face nearby at all times. She had filed her own grief into a folder she had not yet opened. She opened it now, just for a little while, sitting in her son's chair holding a notepad that said, "Don't fix it. Let me." Emma Carter did not know that Ethan had a problem. Matthew brought her on a Saturday, 2 weeks into the arrangement, when the building was quieter and the formal therapy schedule was suspended. He had cleared it with Olivia, who had agreed with the caveat that Emma was not to be used as a therapeutic tool, a framing Matthew had accepted with a mild expression that suggested he found the distinction self-evident. Emma walked into the room, carrying a stuffed rabbit and a sandwich bag of goldfish crackers. She assessed the space the way she assessed all spaces, quickly, thoroughly, and with primary interest in the other person in it. She walked up to Ethan's chair, looked at him directly, and said, "Your building is really tall. I counted the floors from outside." Ethan looked at her. "Do you know how many floors?" she asked. He did not answer. Emma did not appear concerned by this. She sat down cross-legged on the floor near the chair, opened her sandwich bag, and offered him a cracker. When he did not take one, she put the bag in a neutral location between them and turned her attention to the circuit board kit Matthew had left out. "What's this?" she asked her father. "Circuit board," Matthew said from across the room. "It's got a few things wrong with it." Emma studied it with her characteristic intensity. "I see 2, she said. "Good," Matthew said. He did not say she was right. He was. She was, in fact, correct. Ethan was watching her. Olivia, at the monitor, could see his body had changed position, leaning forward slightly, elbows on knees. Emma started working on the board. She fixed the first error and paused at the second, frowning. "Dad," she said. "This one I don't know." A very long moment passed. Then Ethan got up from the chair, walked over, crouched beside Emma, and pointed at the second misplaced component. Emma looked where he was pointing. "Oh," she said. She fixed it. The LED lit green. "Good catch," she said, and looked at Ethan with complete naturalness, as though this were simply the way conversations worked, one person pointing, the other understanding. She went back to the crackers. Ethan remained sitting on the floor. They spent the next 40 minutes in a state that was not quite playing and not quite working, somewhere in the quiet space between two people who were paying close attention to the same thing. Matthew stayed at the edge of the room and did not intervene. Olivia watched the monitor and did not move. It was the longest Ethan had spent on the floor since before the accident. Then Emma, reaching for a component that had rolled behind her, lost her balance and went sideways. It was a small fall, entirely soft. Barely a tumble, she laughed even as she tipped over, but she made a sharp, surprised sound and her hand hit the edge of the circuit board. Ethan went rigid. The change in his body was instantaneous and total. The way a sound-dampening material absorbs a wave, all that stillness drawn inward, and suddenly vibrating with something that had no other outlet. He looked at Emma. She was fine. She was already laughing, pushing herself back upright, showing her uninjured hand to her father with a look that said, "See, nothing." Ethan's mouth opened. "Wait," he said. One word. A whisper. Barely a breath shaped like language. But everyone in the room heard it. Emma turned to look at him. She did not appear startled or celebratory. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, with earnest, uncomplicated attention. "I'm okay," she told him. "See?" She held up her hand again. Ethan looked at the hand. He looked at Emma. Something in his face moved through several expressions in quick succession. Fear, recognition, relief, and settled in a place that had no name exactly. Somewhere between exhale and arrival. He sat back down on the floor. Emma, satisfied, went back to the crackers. Olivia was standing. She didn't remember standing up. She was holding the edge of the desk and staring at the monitor, and her vision was not entirely clear. A few days later, when the quiet of a Sunday afternoon had made it possible, Olivia found Matthew in the room repacking his components and asked him the question she had been assembling for a week. "Why does it work?" Matthew looked up. He took his time answering, which she had come to understand was not evasion but precision. He sorted through what he actually knew from what he only suspected and tried to give her only the former. "Emma had a hard first 2 years," he said at last. "She was a late talker. There was a period around when her mother left, where she went very quiet. Not like Ethan, but quiet." Olivia was still. "What did the doctors say?" "Responsive to stress. Anxious attachment, they called it." He closed the lid on the component box. "I spent about 4 months trying to get her to talk more, did all the right things, narrated everything I was doing, asked open-ended questions, gave her lots of time. It helped some. But what actually helped was when I stopped trying so hard. What did you do instead? Worked on things near her. Fixed things. Let her see what I was doing. Let her come to me." Olivia set down the tablet she had been holding. "You're not a child psychologist." "No. I was just a dad who didn't know what else to do." He looked at her steadily. "Every person you brought in here was trying to reach Ethan. Trying to create a path from where he is to where you need him to be. That's the right instinct. But I think for Ethan, I think when you've seen something like what he saw being reached for feels dangerous. Like if you let someone pull you out, you might have to feel all of it at once." Olivia was quiet for a long time. Outside, the city moved through its Sunday rhythms, distant and unhurried. "So the alternative," she said slowly, "is just to be in the same place with him, not going anywhere, not asking for anything." Matthew picked up his bag. "The thing about sitting next to someone in the dark is you're not fixing the dark. You're just making sure they're not alone in it." Olivia looked at her hands. She was, she realized, not accustomed to being taught things. She had spent so many years being the person with the answer in the room that she had quietly stopped expecting to encounter ideas she didn't already have. "I've been trying to pull him back," she said. "I know," Matthew said gently. "And he's been trying to tell you he needs to come back in his own time." She nodded once, slowly, and did not say anything else. Matthew left the room, and Olivia stood in the quiet and let the information settle into her like something she had needed for a long time and only now knew how to receive. It happened on a Thursday evening, 11 days after Emma's visit. Olivia had put Ethan to bed at 8:30, as usual. She had read to him she did this every night, regardless of his silence, because she had decided early on that she would continue all the ordinary rituals of being his mother and not let the absence of his voice hollow them out. She read from a book about a boy who built a boat. Ethan listened with his eyes open and his hands folded on top of the blanket. She turned off the light and left the door open 3 inches, the way he liked. At 9:45, she heard a sound from his room. It was not language, exactly, more like a sharp intake of breath followed by a low, formless sound, the kind of noise a person makes when a dream cracks open into waking and they can't tell the difference yet. She was in his room in seconds. He was sitting up in bed, rigid, eyes wide, seeing something that was not in the room. His hands were gripping the blanket with such force that the fabric had bunched and twisted between his fingers. He was somewhere else entirely. Not in his bedroom, not in the building, not in this year. Olivia sat down on the edge of the bed. Her instinct was to hold him, to say his name, to tell him he was safe, to pull him back the way she always tried to pull him back. She reached for him, and then stopped. She thought about what Matthew had said, about the dark, about sitting in it with someone rather than trying to fix it from the outside. She did not take his hands. She did not say his name. She sat very still on the edge of the bed, close enough that he could feel her presence, and she did not speak, and she did not reach, and she did not ask him to come anywhere. She waited. A minute passed, then another. The rigidity in Ethan's body began to release in small, slow stages, like ice in April, not all at once, but incrementally. One held breath followed by another, the grip on the blanket easing, the set of his jaw softening. He became aware of her. She could see it happen the moment he registered that she was there, that she had been there, that she had not tried to make him be anywhere different. His eyes found her in the dim room. "I saw him," Ethan said. His voice was almost nothing, rough and thin and barely there, a sound that had traveled a very long distance to get out. "I saw Dad, at the corner." Olivia did not move. She kept her hands in her lap. She let the words come. He was in the car. Ethan's voice broke and recovered and broke again, and then he wasn't. And I couldn't. He stopped. He breathed. I kept calling. Nobody heard. "I hear you," Olivia said. Her own voice was so careful, so precisely controlled, that the effort of it cost her something she could feel. "I hear you right now." Ethan looked at her for a long time. Then he moved across the bed and pressed himself against her side, and Olivia wrapped her arm around him and held on, and they stayed like that in the dark room while the city moved outside and the building was quiet, and somewhere 5 floors down, the electrical panel Matthew had repaired 3 weeks ago hummed steadily along. Neither of them spoke for a very long time. When Ethan finally went back to sleep, Olivia sat in the chair beside his bed until 3 in the morning, not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to be there if he needed the same thing again. Just presence. Just someone in the room. No fixing, no pulling, no pathway towards something better. Just here. Ethan did not become a different child overnight. That was the thing Olivia had to keep reminding herself in the weeks that followed. Progress was not a slope, but a terrain, full of level stretches and brief reverses and sudden forward lurches that caught you off guard. Some mornings he was quieter than others. Some sessions with Dr. Tully, who had adjusted his approach significantly after a long conversation with Matthew, ended with Ethan participating, and others ended with Ethan at the window again. But the window no longer meant what it once had. He was not locked out there. He was looking at something, processing something, returning from something. The silence had changed texture from absence to thought. He began speaking in small increments. Single words at first, then short clusters. He told Dr. Price that the blue ball was too bouncy. He told Olivia one morning that he wanted eggs instead of cereal. He asked Matthew, On one of the last days Matthew came to the penthouse, whether the circuit board kit could be made to run a small motor instead of just a light. Matthew said he thought it could, and sketched out the modifications needed. Ethan studied the sketch for a long time, and then took it with him to his room. The formal maintenance work was long completed by that point. Matthew had stayed on through an informal arrangement that Olivia had structured carefully, as she structured all things, but which both of them understood had outlasted its original justification. On the last scheduled day, he packed his bag with the same thoroughness he brought to every departure, checked the room once more out of habit, and said goodbye to Dr. Price and Dr. Tully in the hallway. He was at the elevator when Olivia appeared. "I looked into a program," she said, "through MedAxis. We fund a behavioral health initiative in 3 cities. We're building a component focused on childhood trauma and language recovery. I've been thinking we've been too focused on clinical protocols, and not enough on what you might call environmental factors, presence, non-directive engagement." She paused. "I'm looking for an advisory consultant. Someone without a clinical background, actually. That's intentional." Matthew looked at her. He seemed to be thinking about it honestly, rather than immediately. "You'd have to talk to a lot of people in conference rooms," Olivia said. "I'm better on floors," he said. "I know. That's why I'm asking." There was a pause. Not the kind of pause Olivia usually had in negotiations, the kind she used as a tool. A different kind. The kind that came when something real was being considered. "Would I still be able to work my regular contracts?" he asked. "Yes. Emma's pickup is at 3:15. We can work around that." He nodded once. "I'll think about it," he said. It was not a dismissal. It was the answer of a man who meant what he said. The elevator came. Matthew stepped in. The doors began to close. From down the hallway, from the room by the window, a voice small and still slightly hoarse from a long time of not being used carried through the quiet of the penthouse. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" Matthew held the door open. He looked toward the sound. Then he looked back at Olivia, and something in his face did what it rarely did. It opened, just slightly, in a way that had nothing to do with professional courtesy or careful distance. He let go of the door. "Yeah," he said, though whether to Ethan or to Olivia or to both of them was not entirely clear, and perhaps it did not need to be. "I'll be back." The elevator closed. The penthouse was quiet. In the room by the window, Ethan was bent over a new sketch, his pencil moving in careful, deliberate lines, building something that had a shape he had not quite decided yet, but was clearly, unmistakably, on its way to being complete.